So in response to a GLOBEBUSTER'S video, I thought I would try to calculate the size of the moon shadow on the Earth during a solar eclipse. And I did this math last year for a different video. That was a response to a different guy. But that was for a lunar eclipse. And so it's a different situation, but the math is the same. So I thought I could pull that out and just plug in different numbers and just look at the solar eclipse. Like I said, this is a response to a GLOBEBUSTER'S video. This is a channel run by a guy, well, I should say a dude because he looks like the dude. But a dude named Bob, who he seems to be a nice enough guy, so I don't want to trash talk him or be mean or anything like that, but he is a flat earther, so by definition a lunatic. But he says a few things in this video that kind of pissed me off in particular. And these have to do with the shadows and the nature of shadows, because, I mean, come on. Surely to God, if there's anything that everybody can agree on, it's the fundamental mechanics of shadows. And this isn't rocket science. Now, I know you guys don't believe in rockets, but if you did, this ain't that. I mean, it's pretty pedestrian stuff. So I would like to think that everybody in the world can agree on, what shadows are and, how they operate. I'll play a little clip.
On the ball earth, and this is something that I came across this week from a new YouTuber called Flat Earth Consequences, and I believe he is in the chat. Yes, he is. So thank you very much, Flat Earth Consequences, for this. And what this is, he's basically going through this, and he's saying, wait a minute. What we have here is a NASA photograph, okay? And this looks like it's Mexico leading down into South America, something like that. But what we're seeing here is supposedly...
I thought I would just interject here. It's kind of interesting how, all NASA photographs are fake unless they can get something out of them, right? I mean, come on. If all NASA photographs are fake, why would they throw this bone in here for you? Think about that for a minute.
The shadow of the moon, okay, during a total eclipse. And that's all fine and dandy until you start thinking about the geometry behind the light that would cause this phenomenon. And so what we do, we're going to go back to this little diagram here, which he shows. And what we're seeing is if the sun is back here, okay, and shining on a sphere, and of course the light source, mind you, is also going to be roughly the same size as what the moon would be, right? Because even though the sun is 400 times further away, it's supposedly 400 times bigger, and that's why they both look the same size in the sky. So the mainstream tells us. But nevertheless, I have never in my life seen an instance where you can shine a light on any object and have the resulting shadow be smaller than the object itself. It always is bigger. And of course, one of the primary factors to that, two of the primary factors is not only how close the light source is, behind it, but also how far above the shadow surface the object is that's casting the shadow is. So if you think about this, and this is absolute common sense to me, if you think about this, anything...
All right, so let's think about this for a little bit. So suppose you're in this plane, okay, on this board, and you're in the dark portion here in the shadow. And you look back toward the light source, right? Can you see it? No, you can't because there's a big ball in the way. So you're in the shadow, right? You move out here and you look out toward the light source. Can you see it? Well, yes, you can. It's burning your retinas, so you're not in the shadow anymore. So, that's pretty simple. But notice in this diagram that the light is a point source of light, and the sun isn't a point source of light. The sun is a little bit bigger than that. So, that's going to affect the geometry of the shadow. So let's have a look at how that geometry is affected. All right, imagine the sun's a little bit bigger, and you see the cone is going to get narrower. If the sun were the same size as the Earth, it wouldn't be a cone. It would be a cylinder of shadow that would go directly behind the Earth, and it would just be an infinite cone. Or infinite cylinder. Make the sun a little bit bigger, and now the cone tapers inward. All right. So again, Put yourself in a picture, okay? Imagine you're out here somewhere and you look toward the sun. Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it. It's burning your retina, so you know you're not in the shadow. You're blind, but you're not in the shadow. All right, so we move in a little bit and you look at the sun. Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it. It's right there. So, you know, you're not in the shadow. Now, the Earth is blocking some of the light, so you're in reduced light, but you're not in a shadow. Or you're not in a complete shadow, I should say. And you keep moving a little bit until you're right behind the Earth, and you look back toward the sun. Can you see it? No, you can't see it at all. You can't see this portion of the sun, and you can't see this portion of the sun. You can't see any of the sun. There's no light reaching you. You're in total darkness. Great. You move out of that, you're no longer in total darkness. If you move out of that this way, you're also no longer in total darkness. And so that's the situation, and that's the situation with a solar eclipse. I don't know if Bob has ever been in an airplane, but you know, when you're taking off and landing, very often you can look down at the ground and see the shadow of the airplane. And coincidentally, it doesn't look drastically larger than the airplane should look. I mean, it's not really an expanded shadow. Sometimes it doesn't look significantly reduced, but sometimes it does. For example, the shadow on the runway here, I doubt that the airplane is that small. I mean, look at it. The landing gear doesn't even stretch beyond the width of one of those white lines. There's a shadow of a jumbo jet, and you can see a bus or a van on the road. They look pretty reasonable size. I mean, it doesn't look like the shadow is obscenely large to me. And a telephone pole, you know, the shadow of a telephone pole, the top of the telephone pole is never wider than the bottom of the pole. And for a final example, I thought I would bring up Mount Rainier, because no conversation with flat earthers about shadows is going to be complete without bringing up Mount Rainier. This photograph has been used by both flat earthers and non-flat earthers to push their positions. Originally, this photograph was used by non-flat earthers because, as you can see in the photograph, this is either at sunrise or sunset, and the mountain is actually casting an upward shadow onto the underside of the clouds. This should never happen on a flat world, because the sun should never be below the clouds on a flat world. More recently, however, this photograph is being used by flat earthers to try to say that shadows increase with size the further away they move from the object. But is that really what's happening here? Or is this just a case of perspective? So that's kind of the funny thing with flat earthers, is they love perspective. They can't get enough perspective. With every video they bring up perspective, unless it doesn't help them. When it doesn't help them, they forget about perspective and they say, oh look, this shadow's getting bigger. But are these railroad tracks getting bigger? If there's a train on these tracks and it moves away from you into the horizon, is it getting smaller? No, it just looks like it's getting smaller. And by the same token, if you see Mount Rainier off in a distant horizon and you can hold your thumb up and cover the mountain with your thumb, it's not really smaller than your thumb. So photographs like this, all this is showing is simple perspective and nothing more. And this shadow is not getting bigger with distance. Alright, so as I mentioned before, I made a video last year looking at the lunar eclipse and calculating the size of the Earth shadow during a lunar eclipse. This is that video. I'm not going to go through it. You know, you can see how popular I am, but I'm not going to go through this video. But I'm going to point out the mechanics in the math, because it's the same math that I'll use for the solar eclipse. So in this image, this is the sun and the Earth shadow cast at some distance, which is the lunar distance. And all I did is set up a series of triangles and looked at the angle between the sun and the Earth, and then it simply followed that same angle at a lunar distance beyond the Earth. Okay, and so what you can see in doing this is that this triangle, because this angle is identical to this angle, this triangle here is equal to this right triangle. And so that being the case, with the two equivalent triangles, that the the ratio of their two sides is going to be equal. So this side divided by this side is going to equal this side divided by this side. Okay? And so all you have to do is plug in the numbers and you can determine what any of these sides are. And what we're looking for is the shadow. So we're looking for that length here, and this length is equal to the radius of the Earth, which is this full length, minus whatever that is, you see? So by plugging in the numbers for the distances of these bodies and the radiuses and whatnot, we can calculate what this distance is, and then once we calculate that, we can subtract that from the Earth's radius and determine what the shadow radius is going to be at some distance. And so that's what I did looking at a solar eclipse. The only difference is, let me zoom that back in a little bit. As you can see, the shadow radius for the lunar eclipse is pretty huge. This is 4,598 kilometers is what I calculated. So being this big, you know, if you're off a little bit, I could be off by a few hundred kilometers and it's not going to matter. It's still a big shadow, and I'm not really that concerned, you know, how precise it is. That's not really the case looking at a solar eclipse, because there you're looking at a very small shadow on the Earth's surface. And if I'm off by a few hundred kilometers, that's going to be a difference between having no shadow and having some huge shadow that's just ridiculously larger than it is in reality. And so it takes a little bit more precision in looking at a solar eclipse. So I didn't actually know this until I started to make this response video, but we're going to have a total solar eclipse next year in 2017. Now, I've never actually seen one. I've seen partial solar eclipses, but I've never been fortunate enough to be in the path. And this path is going to sweep across a good portion of the country, so I'm going to drive a little bit and actually try to see my first total solar eclipse. But I went to the website that has the data, and I pulled up the data on this eclipse, and the path width is going to be about 71 miles. So the shadow diameter of the moon is going to be about 71 miles. So I have at least a good ballpark number that I can use to judge my calculations by. So going back to the solar eclipse, we can set this up exactly the same way that I set up the lunar eclipse, in that I can set it up as a series of right triangles that are essentially equivalent to one another. And that being the case, the ratio of two sides of one of the triangles is going to be equal to the ratio of the two sides of the other right triangle. And if we know three of those numbers, we can determine what the fourth number is. And using that information, we can determine what the shadow radius and diameter is going to be of the Earth, of the moon cast on the surface of the Earth. So I'm going to have to be a little bit more precise than when I calculated the shadow for the lunar eclipse. So what I've done on this spreadsheet is I pulled out the values for the known values for the moon's radius, the sun's radius, the sun-Earth distance, and the moon-Earth distance. But the difference is I took into account the eccentricities of these orbits, because neither orbit is a perfect circle. And so I thought I would try calculating the size of the shadow when the sun, moon, and Earth are closest to one another, and then again when the sun, moon, and Earth are as far apart from one another as possible, and see how those results go. And that's what I've done here in the first result. When they're farthest apart, I got a result of negative 139 miles, effectively zero. In other words, the cone of the shadow from the moon doesn't reach the Earth. They're too far apart, and there's no shadow cast on the Earth's surface. And then when the three bodies are closest to one another, I obtained a result of 33 miles, which is still short of the anticipated 71 miles that we expect for the coming solar eclipse shadow. So then I looked at these numbers and I asked myself, well, what can I do to make them more precise? I mean, what what is the grossest error within these numbers, because this is, I'm not NASA, right? These numbers are, this is a layman's calculation here. So the one thing I thought would make the biggest difference is I realized that in looking at the Earth-Moon distance, what I'm actually looking at, the values that I pulled out from Wikipedia, are essentially the distances between the centers of the bodies. And what we're doing is casting a shadow from the moon onto the Earth's surface, so we don't want that full distance between the centers, right? Because it's only going to the Earth's surface, not the center of the Earth. And so for the two distances of the moon-Earth distance, the apogee and the perigee, I subtracted out the radius of the Earth, and I tried the calculations again with those adjustments taken into account. And the results are pretty interesting. Again, when they're farthest apart, I got a negative result, so there's no shadow. But when the sun, moon, and Earth are closest to one another, I got a result of 71 miles, which is closer. It's closer than to the diameter of the coming eclipse than I would have expected. So I'm pretty happy with that. I don't actually know what the range is between solar eclipses. I don't know if the 2017 eclipse shadow is going to be abnormally large or small or anything like that. And it could be in a different year that the shadow is bigger, and my result would be further off. But again, there are other adjustments I could have made. I don't think they would have made as big a difference as that one. And like I said before, this is a layman's calculation. All things considered, I think the results are pretty good. So I leave comments sometimes on Flat Earth videos. And the other day I read a reply to one of my comments, or at least I think it was to one of my comments. It could have been a reply to somebody else, but I think it was to me. And the guy says, "I see you on so many different Flat Earth videos posting. Why are you so interested in the subject? Government troll?" And they always call you a government troll or a shill or something like that. If you're coming from a different perspective and you're maybe trying to show them the light or something like that. But I would say to this guy, if you're a liberal, pay attention to conservative news. And if you're a conservative, pay attention to liberal news. And if you're a scientist or in a scientific profession, watch a lunatics video every once in a while. And if you're a lunatic, try science every once in a while. Get out of your bubble and don't be so paranoid.